My name is Elizabeth Max, and the topic that I am reviewing today is about video games. My advocate's main claim that I'm responding to is that video games are a positive source of cognitive development. My main claim and response to that claim is that the ambiguity and lack of attention to all types of cognitive development renders the arguer's claim unacceptable. My first claim is that the opposition's conclusions from his evidence are too vague for a clear connection between video games and an individual's focus and attention. The advocate brought up a University of Texas study which mentioned that it discovered that violent video games increase the focus of the player, directing their attention to what was important. The big part of this evidence was the inference made from this. Never said what exactly the individuals started to focus on, and it never identified what was considered important. So it didn't really make it clear how this was positive for cognitive development. The advocate also concluded that action gamers are better drivers than non-gamers or casual gamers. The advocate made this conclusion based on a study using the useful field of view test, because this test, he claims that this test used the same skills in driving and were the same ones. The same skills that are used in driving were the same ones that were tested in the UFOV test. But the advocate fails to mention how much actual gameplay is needed to have this said superior driving skills. And the amount of time wasted may outweigh the benefits of being a better driver. Again, the conclusions made from the evidence were sort of unclear, which made the evidence weak. This brings me to my next point, that the arguer disregards that any social ramifications of spending too much time playing video games exists. So basically, he doesn't really talk about how spending too much time playing video games can affect real life interactions, because the time that you're spending playing on the games may take away from time with social real life interactions. He does mention how video games can improve morality, but fails to discuss how video games affect human relations or an individual's emotional quotient. Emotional quotient is, to kind of pair it with, it's kind of like the IQ, but for your emotions. And it's a psychology term that two leading researchers on emotional intelligence, John B. Mayer and Peter Salovey, define as the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and actions. Basically, an emotional quotient is the basic ability to react and interact efficiently and with little conflict between your peers. So another study from Ricardo Salguero, he is an author of a book called Addiction, and it's like 107 volumes, it's extremely long, but he's one of the authors, and he did a journal topic on video games, and he says that excessive use of video games is associated with a number of problems which resemble dependence syndrome. This was done from studies he did with adolescents over a period of 10 years. The World Health Organization defines dependence syndrome as being a cluster of physiological, behavioral, and cognitive phenomena in which the use of a substance or class of substances takes on a much higher priority for a given individual than the behaviors that once had greater value. So basically, when you apply this definition to video games, it's putting adolescents, he found that adolescents put video games in a higher priority than everyday things such as maintaining a healthy relationship with peers, hygiene, nutrition, and schoolwork. Okay, so to conclude my refutation, the advocate's argument included weak evidence, vague references, and neglected to recognize the counter-evidence that make the argument that video games are a positive source of cognitive development renders that argument invalid. Thank you.
All right, the main points were labeled at the beginning pretty well. I think you've got an interesting challenge on vagueness on that first point, but you need to be a little more precise yourself as to what the vagueness issue means and how it undermines the inference that the advocate's presenting. Basically, what you end up doing is simply criticizing the University of Texas study and kind of press them on, what their standard is, and that's about as far as it goes. I thought your press or the idea on the second point concerning the driving standards was also just mostly kind of a push on the argument without actually developing a lot on it. But this was a stronger question, and that is how much exposure do you need to have in order to get the impact of this benefit? And I thought that was a pretty reasonable question. Now, in a longer debate, there might in fact be an answer on that, in which case you would probably be left struggling because that's all you had was that one challenge on that. So maybe something else on that point would be helpful to push as well. On the second point, I thought that you had a pretty clear movement on that. I was a little confused because you get talking about this emotional quotient, you start defining what it is, and I'm wondering, okay, this is going to develop into something, but it didn't really feel like you were getting there. I assumed that the whole argument about dependence syndrome and the notion that they spend all this time on these other things is an example of emotional quotients, and how that is in fact a sacrifice that's being made for these so-called benefits. I think that argument needed to come together a little bit more. I think I can see what you're doing there, but it needs to be clearer to the audience as you're putting those arguments together. The one thing that I thought that you did a very nice job of there at the end was summarizing those arguments. So sometimes those arguments that weren't necessarily quite as clear when you were giving them at the beginning were clearer at the end because you kind of explained what the point was that you were trying to make. All right? All right. Thank you.